The New Babylon, Chapter 2. The collapse came relatively quickly. Over the course of several days, the stock market plummeted. As it started to decline, thousands of people panicked and sought to cash out. As they did, it quickly became clear that the market, propped up for years with unsubstantiated derivatives, was in a free fall. Slowly, banks closed their doors. The credit and debit cards no longer worked at the grocery stores and gas pumps. In the course of 2 weeks, there was no longer any food at the stores, and they were closed for good. The gas pumps were sucked dry, and no more was being delivered. Those that did still have cash were able to get the last of the food and the gas. But this only sustained them for a short time. Then the young and strong started preying on the old and the weak. Gangs and larger groups crushed individuals and smaller groups. Every time one ventured into the street, they could face a kill or be killed reality. The property that the church sat on encompassed about half an acre. Before the collapse, it was a lower to middle class neighborhood. The houses on the block were modest, but neatly kept for the most part. At the corner, on the end of the block, sat the L. The L was an elevated train track upon which the subway ran. The subway system had operated on Metro cards, prepaid cards often tied to one's credit or debit card or checking account. It was still possible to purchase tokens on site to gain access to the trains. And after the collapse of the banking systems, the Metro cards no longer worked. Those that had a reserve of cash were able to buy tokens. However, not many people carried cash in those days. And the ones that did have cash reserved those funds for higher priority stuff like groceries and medicines. It became quickly apparent how few people operated with cash, as gas stations, stores, and public services shut down completely in the first month following the collapse. It wasn't long before the city's subway system was forced to shut down as well. Gangs rioted and looted, robbed the neighborhoods they controlled. When those resources dried up, they ventured out into the surrounding neighborhoods. This caused warring with rival gangs, as all struggled to gain or keep control of what they had. It's a testimony to the lack of foresight and preparedness that was evident on a broad scale. The gangs, while having combined numbers that far surpassed any local or state authority, lacked the wherewithal to think toward the future. They were not prepared for what came. They were not able to organize those numbers against the prevailing police and governmental agencies. Instead, they resorted to fighting amongst themselves until they had largely killed each other off. What was left of those gangs were forced to flee for the suburbs in a desperate attempt to survive. The few that did organize and stay were largely not a threat to a well-prepared group, left instead to prey on weaker, smaller groups and individuals. The L was all but abandoned now. The deactivated track network used mostly as a thoroughfare for transients and refugees moving about the city. In good times, the underground subway system was a place to avoid as much as possible by decent folks. Now, even an armed, well-trained group would avoid it at all cost. During the preceding years of preparation, Pastor Rubens had engaged his neighbors any chance he got. He invited them to church functions. He held barbecues and invited the neighbors. He was good to the older neighborhood block members, bringing them food in hard times. He knew which of his neighbors were honest and hard-working, and when they found themselves laid off or out of work for any reason, he connected them to church members who would hire them to work in their businesses. A contractor who was a longtime church member often hired some of them on a temporary basis when he was busy. The people came to know and respect Pastor Rubens. The neighborhood block that was home to the church became a close, tight-knit community. Now those same residents served with the church group on security patrols and work details. They helped keep the block secure and safe. While they were not actually part of the church group, they served in a support role. But the support was mutual. They helped the church group work and stay safe, and Pastor Rubens helped feed and tend to the neighbors' medical needs. On a practical level, the neighborhood made up one community with several different levels. Pastor Rubens' group had been preparing for years. They had food stores and water stores. They had systems in place to produce more of each. They had a cohesive security force. The neighbors, most of who had none of those things, were largely honest, hard-working people. Good people who just ignored the need to prep. They knew and trusted Pastor Rubens. They knew that their survival now depended upon him and his group. They worked. They provided a valuable resource, man and woman power. Pastor Rubens and one of the church deacons, John Allen, led the initiative to include the neighbors. They were instrumental in the community outreach actions that incubated those relationships early on. They had always been planning for a time when the group at the church would need to assimilate with the neighborhood residents. John Allen led the youth and teen group at the church. If he saw a neighbor struggling with a task or project, he would quickly dispatch the teens to go render assistance. It was these gestures of goodwill that helped endear the neighborhood to the church group. At the same time, it taught the teens the spirit and principle of helping others and being a good neighbor. The church group leadership always had the larger picture in mind, readying for the day whenever the collapse would come and the two groups would merge. The neighbors, however, were mostly not preparedness-minded, and at first, after the collapse, some of them had problems merging with the church group. It was a difficult transition for some, as both sides learned to work and function together. As Pastor Rubens finished up his morning sermon, he walked up the aisle toward the lobby of the church. Outside at the end of the block, he heard two short, semi-automatic rifle bursts, followed by another short burst. At the same time, 3 shots were fired from a large caliber rifle in the church bell tower, followed by the ringing of the bell, which served as a signal for the neighbors to shelter in place. Pastor looked over at John Allen as the two quickened their pace toward the front door.